There's a language living in Europe today that no other language on earth can explain. It has no family, no sisters, no parent. It simply exists, like it fell out of the sky. If that sentence just gave you a strange feeling in your chest, stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand why scientists call this the biggest mystery in all of European history. Somewhere between the mountains of Spain and France, there's a group of people called the Basque. For centuries, the world looked at them and shrugged. Just another European group, right? Just another old culture with a strange accent and some traditional dances. That is what most people believed. That is what most textbooks said. But that belief is now falling apart. Because when scientists finally looked closely at Basque DNA, they found something that did not fit the story anyone expected. Something that made researchers pause, look again, and ask a question that still does not have a full answer. Who are the Basque people really, and where do they actually come from? To understand why this question is so powerful, we need to go back, not just a few hundred years back. And where did they actually come from? To understand why this question is so powerful, we need to go back, not just a few hundred years back. We need to go back thousands of years, to a time before nations existed, before borders were drawn, before most of the languages we speak today were even born. Picture Europe long before Rome, long before the Celts spread across the land, long before waves of people moved in from the east, bringing new languages, new tools, new ways of living. Europe was not one thing. It was a patchwork of different groups, different tongues, different bloodlines, slowly shifting and mixing over generations. Almost all of those ancient languages are gone now, swallowed up, replaced, forgotten. Except one. The Basque language, called Euskara by the people who speak it, survived. It sits quietly in a mountain region between Spain and France, still spoken today, still passed down parent to child, still very much alive. And here is the strange part. Euskara is not related to Spanish. It is not related to French. It is not related to English, German, Russian, Italian, or any other European language you can name. Most European languages come from one giant family tree called Indo-European. Spanish, French, English, Hindi, even Persian. They all connect somewhere on that tree, like faraway cousins. Basque is not on that tree at all. It stands alone. Linguists have tried for years to find its relatives. They have searched old records, dead languages, forgotten dialects. Nothing fits. Some researchers believe it may be one of the last surviving voices of a Europe that existed before the great language shifts happened. A voice from a world that mostly disappeared. That alone should already give you chills. But it gets deeper. If you are starting to feel that pull, that quiet curiosity in your stomach, that is exactly the feeling this story deserves. So let us keep going together. For a long time, the strange language was the only real clue people had. Historians guessed they imagined ancient tribes hiding in the mountains, untouched by outside forces, protected by rock and distance. It was a nice story. Simple. Romantic, even. But nice stories are not always true stories, because language can tell you part of an answer, but it cannot tell you everything. Language explains how people spoke. It does not fully explain where people came from, who their ancestors were, or how their bodies and blood connect to the deep past. For that, scientists needed something more powerful than old words. They needed DNA. In recent years, researchers have been able to study ancient bones, ancient teeth, ancient burial sites across Europe. From these remains, they can pull out fragments of genetic code, tiny pieces of biological memory that have survived thousands of years underground. This is where the real twist begins. Before this genetic research, many people assumed the Basque were the purest, most untouched, most ancient population in all of Europe. A group frozen in time, descendants of the very first hunters who walked into Europe after the Ice Age. Never mixing, never changing, just quietly preserving the old world in their mountains while everyone else transformed. It is a powerful image, isolated, unbroken, ancient beyond imagination. But the evidence tells a more complicated story. Genetic studies suggest that the Basque are not simply an untouched leftover from the Ice Age. Genetic studies suggest that the Basque are not simply an untouched leftover from the Ice Age. Instead, the picture is more layered. Ancient hunter-gatherer groups did live in that region for thousands of years, but later, waves of early farmers moved into Europe from the east, bringing agriculture, new tools, and new genetic markers with them. Over time, in most of Europe, these newcomers mixed heavily with local populations, blending bloodlines again and again through waves of migration. In the Basque region, something different seems to have happened. Some researchers believe that after an early period of mixing between hunter-gatherers and incoming farmers, the Basque population became more isolated than their neighbors. Not completely closed off, but genetically more separated from later waves of migration that reshaped much of the rest of Europe. While other regions kept absorbing new genetic influences over centuries, the Basque region seems to have experienced less of that ongoing mixing. In simple words, it is not that they were never touched by outside people. It is that, after a certain point, they stopped mixing as much as everyone else did. That is a very different story than the one most people believed, and it changes everything about how we should think about identity. In simple words, it is not that they were never touched by outside people. It is that, after a certain point, they stopped mixing as much as everyone else did. That is a very different story than the one most people believed, and it changes everything about how we should think about identity. Because for years, many assumed the Basque were simply the oldest untouched Europeans, a living fossil of the past. Now the evidence suggests something more human, more complicated, and honestly, more interesting. They are not a frozen photograph from the Ice Age. They are the result of ancient mixing, followed by isolation, followed by generations of staying close to home while history moved differently around them. If a person you know has ever felt out of place, different from everyone around them, maybe holding on to something old, while the world kept changing, share this video with them, because in some strange way, this ancient story is also their story. Now here is where the mystery gets even deeper, because if the Basque were never a completely pure, untouched group frozen since the Ice Age, then why does their DNA still look so different from their neighbors today? This is the part where the story stops being simple. Scientists began comparing Basque genetic patterns to populations across Spain, France, and the rest of Europe, and the differences were noticeable. Even though the Basque share deep ancestral roots with other Europeans, especially with early farming populations that arrived in the region thousands of years ago, their genetic patterns still stand out as unusually distinct compared to their closest geographic neighbors. Why would that be? One theory focuses on geography itself. The Basque homeland sits in a mountainous region tucked between two powerful modern nations, Spain and France. Mountains are natural walls. They slow down movement. They make travel harder. Armies find it difficult to fully conquer mountain valleys. Traders take longer paths around them. Entire empires have historically struggled to control mountain populations the way they control flat, open land. For thousands of years, while empires rose and fell across lowland Europe, while Rome expanded, while later kingdoms and armies pushed through open plains, the Basque Mountains offered something rare, protection through terrain. That does not mean total isolation. There is evidence of trade, contact, and cultural exchange over the centuries, but it does suggest something powerful, a place where full genetic and cultural replacement happened more slowly than in the open lowlands nearby. Think about that for a moment. While much of Europe experienced wave after wave of new arrivals, new rulers, new bloodlines mixing in, the Basque region experienced a slower version of that process. Not frozen, not untouched, but different in pace. Slower change, over thousands of years, can leave a population looking strikingly distinct from its neighbors, even without full isolation. That difference is not just visible in genetics, it is visible in tradition. Basque culture carries customs, sports, even without full isolation. That difference is not just visible in genetics, it is visible in tradition. Basque culture carries customs, sports, and social structures that feel noticeably different from surrounding regions. Their traditional stick sport, their unique style of communal decision-making in old villages, their strong sense of separate identity, none of that appeared randomly. It grew from generations of relative separation, shaped by mountains, shaped by distance, shaped by history moving around them instead of through them. But if you think this is where the mystery ends, it is not. Because there is another twist waiting, and it involves blood type. Long before modern DNA testing existed, doctors and researchers noticed something strange about the Basque population. Their blood type patterns did not match the rest of Europe. Specifically, researchers found unusually high rates of a certain blood type pattern in the Basque region compared to almost anywhere else on the continent. At the time, nobody could fully explain why. Some early researchers got excited. They wondered if this was proof of something dramatic, some completely separate ancient origin, a hidden branch of humanity untouched since prehistoric times. It became a popular idea in books and documentaries for years, but modern genetic research paints a more careful picture. The unusual blood type patterns are now understood as part of the broader story of relative isolation and genetic drift, not evidence of a completely separate human origin. In small, semi-isolated populations, certain genetic traits can become unusually common over many generations, simply through the normal process of who reproduces with whom. And this is a well-understood pattern in population genetics, seen in various isolated communities around the world, not just the Basque. So the wild theory of a lost separate species turned out to be less dramatic, but the real explanation is, in its own way, just as fascinating. It shows how thousands of years of relative separation can shape a population's biology in subtle but measurable ways. A slow, quiet process. Not a dramatic one, but real. Is it not strange how the truth is often less like a movie and more like something patient, something written slowly across centuries? Now let us step back and look at what this really means. For a long time, many origin stories about ancient peoples were built on assumption, imagination, and national pride. Groups wanted to believe they were the oldest, the purest, the most untouched by outside influence. It gave people a sense of deep belonging, a connection stretching back to the very beginning of time. The Basque story shows us something more honest and honestly more moving. They are not untouched. They are not frozen. They are the descendants of real ancient people, hunter-gatherers who once lived across post-Ice Age Europe and early farmers who brought new ways of life thousands of years ago. At some point, in that mountain region, the mixing slowed. Isolation deepened, not completely, but meaningfully. And across thousands of years, a distinct population took shape, carrying old genetic echoes that mostly disappeared everywhere else in Europe. If this is starting to feel bigger than just one small region in Spain and France, that is because it is. Because the Basque story is really a story about what happens to human history when a population is left slightly more alone than everyone else. It shows us how much of ancient Europe has already been erased, blended, rewritten by wave after wave of migration. Most regions lost their original genetic patterns generations ago. Most ancient languages vanished completely. The Basque region is one of the most ancient languages vanished completely. The Basque region is one of the last places where we can still see and hear fragments of a much older Europe, still surviving in modern people, still spoken in modern homes, still carried quietly in modern blood. If a story like that deserves one word, what would you choose? Type it in the comments right now before we go further. Now here is something that might surprise you even more. Some researchers have looked deeper into the connection between Basque genetics and the very first farmers who ever arrived in Europe from the region we now call Anatolia, part of modern-day Turkey. These early farmers began spreading into Europe thousands of years ago, slowly replacing and mixing with the hunter-gatherer groups who had lived there for tens of thousands of years before them. Across most of Europe, this mixing happened extensively. Farmer ancestry and hunter-gatherer ancestry blended together repeatedly, again and again, especially as more migration waves arrived over the following thousands of years, including later movements from populations in the eastern steppes. In the Basque region, the evidence suggests a different pattern. It looks like the early mixing between hunter-gatherers and incoming farmers did happen, but the later waves of migration that reshaped most of the rest of Europe had a smaller genetic impact there. This left the Basque population carrying a genetic signature that leans more heavily toward that earlier layer of ancestry, compared to their neighbors. In other words, they are not older than everyone else, in some magical sense. They simply kept more of an older genetic layer while the rest of Europe kept adding newer layers on top. Picture history as layers of paint on a wall. Most of Europe got painted again and again, color over color over color, until the original layer was almost impossible to see. The Basque region got fewer coats. The old color is still visible underneath, not because time skipped them, but because fewer hands came to repaint that particular wall. That is such a beautiful way to think about ancestry, is it not? Not better, not worse, just less painted over. And this brings us to a deeper emotional truth hiding inside all of this science. Human beings have always wanted to know where they came from. It is one of the oldest questions our species has ever asked. Long before written history, people told stories about their ancestors, their gods, their origins, trying to explain the mystery of their own existence. The Basque people have their own traditional stories too, myths and legends passed down through generations, long before modern science entered the picture. And now, thousands of years later, genetic research is adding a new chapter to that ancient search for identity, not replacing the old stories, but sitting alongside them. There is something incredibly human about that. Somewhere in the mountains between Spain and France, families have been asking, in their own way, for centuries, who are we, and how far back do we go? And piece by piece, modern science is offering fragments of an answer without ever fully solving the whole mystery. Because, make no mistake, this story is still not finished. Researchers continue to study ancient remains from the region, comparing them to modern populations, refining timelines, testing new samples. Some questions are becoming clearer. Others remain genuinely debated among historians and geneticists. This is not a story with a neat, final answer wrapped in a bow. It is a living investigation, still unfolding today, in real research happening in real universities and laboratories. If you have made it this far into the story, you are already more invested in this mystery than most people who will ever hear about it. So let us go even deeper. Let us talk about what's wrapped in a bow. It is a living investigation, still unfolding today, in real research happening in real universities and laboratories. If you have made it this far into the story, you are already more invested in this mystery than most people who will ever hear about it. So let us go even deeper. Let us talk about what this means for the Basque people today, living in the modern world, in modern cities, going to modern schools, using smartphones like everyone else. Because carrying this kind of ancient genetic and linguistic difference is not just a scientific fact. It is a living identity. For centuries, being Basque has meant something distinct, separate from being simply Spanish or simply French, even while sharing citizenship, sharing modern life, sharing much of daily culture with neighboring regions. That sense of being different, of holding something older, has shaped everything from Basque politics to Basque pride to Basque resistance against outside pressure over the centuries. Empires tried to expand into this region. Kingdoms tried to unify it under one identity. Modern nations have tried to fully absorb it into single national stories. And yet, the language survived. The traditions survived. The genetic distinctiveness survived, not because of magic, but because mountains are patient, and because people who feel different tend to protect what makes them different. Generation after generation, there is a lesson buried inside this ancient mystery, one that has nothing to do with ancient DNA. It is about how identity survives, not through complete isolation, because true isolation rarely exists in human history, but through resistance, through pride, through the simple choice made over and over across centuries to keep speaking an old language, to keep marrying within a community, to keep certain traditions alive, even while the rest of the world changes. Every time someone chooses to keep something old alive in language, in blood, in culture, they are quietly shaping the genetic and historical story to keep certain traditions alive, even while the rest of the world changes. Every time someone chooses to keep something old alive, in language, in blood, in culture, they are quietly shaping the genetic and historical story. Their descendants will carry thousands of years into the future. If you have ever protected something important to you, a language your grandparents spoke, a tradition your family still keeps, a piece of identity the modern world keeps pressuring you to let go of, you already understand, on a personal level, exactly what this ancient story is really about. So let us bring this all together now, because the full picture is bigger and more moving than most people realize. The Basque people were never simply an untouched fossil from the Ice Age, frozen in time. It is bigger and more moving than most people realize. The Basque people were never simply an untouched fossil from the Ice Age, frozen in time. That old story, as romantic as it sounds, does not match the evidence. But the real story is not smaller. It is not less impressive. The Basque carry deep ancestral roots, stretching back to some of the earliest post-Ice Age populations in Europe. They absorbed early farming migrations just like the rest of the continent did. And then, protected by mountains, shaped by geography, and reinforced by generations of cultural pride, their population experienced a different pace of change compared to their neighbors, keeping older. Genetic patterns visible in a way that mostly disappeared everywhere else. Their language, Euskara, stands as one of the last surviving voices from a linguistic world that existed before most of Europe's modern languages began forming. Their genetics carry echoes of ancient hunter-gatherers and early farmers, layered together in a pattern slightly different from their neighbors. Not because they are more ancient, but because fewer new layers were added on top over the following thousands of years. Their blood type patterns, once mistaken for evidence of alien origin, turn out to reflect something quieter and more human, the natural result of thousands of years of relative separation shaping biology. None of this makes the Basque people less connected to the rest of humanity. It makes them a rare window into a version of Europe that mostly no longer exists anywhere else, a fragment of the deep past, still breathing, still speaking, still walking through modern streets today. And maybe that is the real lesson hiding underneath this entire mystery. History is not one single straight line moving the same way for everyone. Deep past, still breathing, still speaking, still walking through modern streets today. And maybe that is the real lesson hiding underneath this entire mystery. History is not one single straight line moving the same way for everyone. It moves at different speeds, in different places, shaped by mountains, rivers, oceans, and the choices people make about what to protect and let go. Somewhere in northern Spain and southern France, a population has been quietly carrying pieces of a much older world forward, not because they were forgotten by history, but because history simply moved past them more slowly. That is not a small story. That is one of the most powerful reminders in all of human history, that the past is never as far away as we think. Sometimes it is still alive, still speaking, still walking among us, hidden in a language with no relatives, in blood with old echoes, in mountains that quietly protected something lost. The Basque were never simply the last untouched people of ancient Europe. They are something rarer than that. They are proof that pieces of the deep past can survive, quietly, patiently for thousands of years, waiting for us to finally understand what we were looking at all along. And somewhere, right now, in a small mountain village between Spain and France, a child is still learning to speak a language older than almost anything else in Europe, without even knowing they are keeping one of history's oldest secrets alive with every single word.